Welcome once again to our Global Leadership Summit. I'm Peggy Pelonis, Chair of IDEA Athens and President of the American Community School of Athens, Greece. And it is my pleasure today, my absolute pleasure, to welcome Dr. Pazartzis, who is doing some incredible work towards improving life and living on the planet by being an active advocate of human rights. Dr. Pazartzis is the chair of the Human Rights Committee in the United Nations. She's an attorney by trade who has studied both at the University of Athens and the University of Paris. She's currently professor of law at the University of Athens and president of the European Society of International Law. And with that, let's welcome Dr. Faye Pazartzis. Hello, Faye.
Hello, Peggy, Professor Pelonis. Thank you very much for having me. This is
It's
quite an
great.
honor to be on this platform.
It's wonderful to have you here and to be talking about such important issues that are so close to both of our hearts. Let me just start right off and ask you, what is the role of the Human Rights Committee in the United Nations?
Thank you for asking. Sometimes people tend to confuse it with the Human Rights Council, which is the interstate body that deals with human rights in Geneva. The UN Human Rights Committee, is a supervisory body which is linked to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was adopted in 1966, following the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we are a body of independent experts which look into the practice of states and their implementation of their human rights treaty obligations. And we also look into individual communications, communications coming from individuals from all over the world who believe that one or more of their rights have been violated. And we adjudicate in a quasi-adjudicatory manner. And I say quasi-adjudicatory because our decisions are called views, are not legally binding on states parties. However, having accepted the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, states, of course, have to have a bona fide obligation to follow their human rights obligations. So that is what we do. And we meet 4 times yearly in Geneva, where the UN headquarters for human rights are.
So Faye, you mentioned just now that the Human Rights Committee makes decisions, but they're not necessarily binding of the particular states. So how do you invite or how do you ensure the commitment of the state to achieve, to work towards these goals, to these directives?
Well, Peggy, this is done through a process of monitoring states' progress all through the years. So we have periodic reviews where we look at specific states. They come before the committee within a certain time period. They're asked certain questions by the members of the committee on their human rights obligations and the way they're implementing them. And we give recommendations to the states after what we call a dialogue with a state. So it's really a matter of helping states, offering the technical or legal knowledge or assistance about the content of the human rights obligations, and also using what I would call, and I usually call, our persuasive authority to make human rights relevant in the field and make states realize that it is to their best interest to abide by their human rights obligations towards their citizens as far as possible.
And knowing you and about you, I know that you have a vast amount of knowledge and experience in law and human rights and many other areas as well. I know you speak 3 languages and so on and so forth. But I'm really curious to know how did you come to where you are today in terms of a human rights chair? How did your life trajectory lead you to this place?
Well, it would probably be a long story, but I need to sort of make it short. Let me say that my my specialization is international law. So that was my first opening to this field. And then, of course, I immediately joined academia because I preferred to do academic work, research, and to teach. So I became a university professor in Greece. Now, after that, as time went by, because of my specialization, which is international law, of course, I was approached from the Hellenic government to do advisory work within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But from there, if you wish, I was also approached at a certain point, and that was in 2014, to see if I wanted to stand as a candidate for the Human Rights Committee. Greece had never had a candidate or a member in this prestigious body. And I was asked, I accepted, of course, and I had to go through a process of candidature and within the United Nations in the General Assembly of the UN to be elected to this position. Of course, upon and after my election, and since my election, I work as an independent member. I'm not representing my government or any government, but I work as an independent member. And then within the committee, I had the chance to work for a first mandate of 4 years, which was very, very interesting, exciting. It was the first time I was in the human rights area, which, as you know, is quite interesting. And then I became vice chair and chair, having been elected to that by my peers in the committee. So this is a short story to a long trajectory, which really starts from academia, if you wish,
Mhm.
and teaching and being in the environment of practicing international law.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And speaking of academia, I know that as a guest speaker recently here in the school, you certainly inspired a lot of the students to think in that direction and want to do something to improve life and living on the planet. How do you think we can best prepare youth for improving life and living on the planet?
Well, already what you did in school, and if this, was more generalized all over the world, there are efforts all over the world, but education, especially primary and secondary education, are very important, Peggy. And now, of course, youth is more into all these social issues, especially through social media. Youth is more aware. And I was very impressed actually by the audience in your school because they really seem to be on top of these issues. They knew what the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are. They were familiar with this. This is the only way, I think, through education and talking about these issues. Even with young people, we don't, young people are mature. I mean, they understand if you get a message across to them in a way that, they relate to. And I think that is one of the ways through our youth. It's very important because, civil society, of course, is engaged, and there's many components of civil society that work on these issues. Monitor all these issues, and many non-governmental organizations. But I think what we're seeing now in this movement of youth saying, hey, climate change affects us. What are you older guys doing, for us? This is very important. And I'm glad it's come across to the youth of today.
Yeah, I think it's so important to help them be much more aware of local and global issues because
Absolutely.
it's the only way to become responsible global citizens. And also, it's important for them to understand that what was happening around them also eventually affects them. So you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which is why one of the reasons that we are, discussing this in this particular platform. The Sustainable Development Goals are something that can be easily implemented into the schools and brought into the curriculum, and connections can be made. And you said something very, very important. The youth are now taking a stand on what
Okay.
has been happening and saying, we want to change this.
Yes.
But we as adults need to help them because, we kind of created this mess, right? So how do we help them to become responsible global citizens? What are some of the tools that we can give them? You mentioned one. You mentioned awareness. You said talk about these issues in schools. Use the Sustainable Development Goals. What other ways can we help them become responsible global citizens?
I think that is the basic way, what I mentioned before, and also talking about these issues.
Yeah,
You see now, movements in other areas of about, bringing issues forward, talking about problems, not hiding issues. I think that this raising awareness, not only through school, but by helping also young adults become involved in society, whether it's through volunteer work outside of the school a context in particular,
yeah.
or whether it's taking part in international debates or model UNs, or all these are ways, and I see it as a teacher myself for university students. These are ways that help, first of all, raise awareness, and also make younger people think that they also have a say, and the way they will behave or the decisions they make will also, or the critiques they will address to the older generations, will be very important uh, in um, in bringing these issues and keeping them alive. Because we've been talking about climate change perhaps for a year now. It's become very popular, so to speak, but it is an issue that has been there for a while. It took a young person like Greta Thunberg, for example, to bring it out to the fore when she took I think, a sailing ship to go over to the United States just to prove something. It took a group of young adults who have gone to the European Court of Human Rights saying, "Hey, what are you doing for our human rights of the future generation?" These are all very, very new phenomena, and they've come around because youth is now more aware of these issues, is brought into these issues. And I think, that's the only way we can do it. And probably, Peggy, I mean, we need to also admit some of our faults at some point.
Which is not always easy, Faye. And you know very
Yeah,
well that as we grow older, we are more set in our ways, and so change becomes even more difficult. You're
absolutely.
right. It takes people like Greta to bring things to the forefront, and it's good to know that we're empowering the youth to have a stronger voice in the planet that they're going to be inheriting, soon, and are inheriting. So I'm wondering, as I think back to the human rights activism in general. I know that Eleanor Roosevelt was well known for her activism and was appointed chair of the UN Commission of Human Rights.
Hmm.
Do you think we've come a long way since the 1940s, since then? Or do we? I mean, I know we have a long way to go, but have we made strides? Have we made progress?
Definitely. Definitely. When the Universal Declaration was adopted of human rights was adopted in 1948, and Eleanor Roosevelt was one of the driving forces behind this instrument. This was a concise instrument, not very long, enumerating the basic human rights of all individuals. And since then, we've seen the area of human rights develop exponentially,
Mm,
um, in many areas, in civil and political rights, social, economic, cultural rights, in specific rights of vulnerable people, of children, women, persons with handicaps, migrant workers. Who would have thought that this short constitutional, as I always call it, text of 1948, the Universal Declaration, would have developed human rights to such an extent? That does not mean that we're always applying or implementing human rights obligations. Like you say, the world is not yet a utopia. I don't know if it'll ever become one. However, this is now the human protection of human rights and individual rights, and not only civil rights and freedoms, because that's how it started, but also second and third generation human rights has become possible because of people, illuminated people like Eleanor Roosevelt and others, of course, who were behind the driving forces behind human rights in the UN and universally. So yeah.
Are you at liberty, perhaps not to give us an example of something that has been accomplished lately with the intervention of the Human Rights Committee from the UN?
Hmm.
Probably not necessarily specifically.
No, I can give you maybe an example or two. From the way we've had very interesting individual communications coming before us
Mm,
from individuals who claim that climate change is affecting their right to life, for example. We had a case which did have quite a publicity of a person, Mr. Tatiota. It had publicity and it's been published, so I can talk about it. Who had left the island of Kiribati and moved to New Zealand because the very small islands are now in a danger of just being flooded by water.
yeah.
And he moved to New Zealand in search of a better life. And the issue was, of course, that he wasn't um, legally permitted to be in New Zealand. And there was an issue of him being sent back to Kiribati. Of course, we didn't rule in favor of this individual because of our legal instrument on the one we're based.
Mm,
However, we did say that if there was an imminent risk, and we didn't have reports yet of the UN, we do have reports saying that in 10 years, probably 10 to 15 years, many small islands will be submerged by water. But because the specific individual didn't face an imminent risk, it was considered that he could return back to his country. However, we did say that this is going to be an issue of the future and it will have to be looked into. And when individuals facing imminent risks will have to be taken care of, if I can say, in just layman terms.
yeah.
And it was important for the committee because it wasn't very obvious that the environment was closely linked to human rights. And now it's becoming obvious. I mean, individuals are going to human rights bodies, not only us, the European Court, the Inter American Court of Human Rights, saying, hey, right to a healthy environment is also a human right. And courts are opening up to this interpretation of human rights. So this is an example I can give, which ties, of course, to this issue of, environment and climate change, which is, I guess, an issue of the day for this year, perhaps. Yeah.
It's really, as you said before, a lot of this is coming to the forefront, and much more attention is being paid now to the idea
Yes.
of climate change, and just as a funny aside, the recent trip to space where one of our one of my favorite actors, William Shatner, was up there, uh, and he looked down at Earth and said, how fragile our Earth is and how much we really need to take care of it. And so, bringing this to the forefront is so important. But do you think, do you believe that we are going to accomplish or come close to accomplishing many of the SDGs by the year 2030?
I wouldn't be that optimistic, but I think they're there. I mean, the fact that the sustainable goals were adopted, you know, by so many states, by the UN, means that the discussion is out there. And, that means that we and states in particular, because citizens also do their best, but it's really up to states, Peggy, that states really have to monitor the situations after, and have to try to attain these goals. Whether they will or not in the end, attain everything to an optimal a level is not sure, but the effort will be taken into consideration, and I'm sure that there will be some developments at least that will, hopefully to go towards a better world. I don't know if hunger will be eradicated all over the world, Peggy. We have to be honest with ourselves. We don't know what will happen with water, if the whole world, if our world will have water in the future, or the future generations. We don't know. And we might find, our youth might find itself where William Shatner found himself. I mean, traveling to a different planet for a different life. Who knows? Who knows what the future will bring? But the fact that they're there, that, we're talking about the sustainable goals, that it's in the discourse, I think is important. It's a step.
I agree, and I think that what you say, the state, what each state does is very, very important. But I think the communities and the individuals have just as much power, and taking that responsibility to the ground level is going to be so important, because I know so many people who are working towards those goals in local areas and really making a difference. And of course, if the state is helping with that, even better. I think going from the top down and the bottom up also. Um,
But the pressure, if I may, sorry for interrupting, the pressure, if I may, from civil society, from individuals, from us, us generally, towards our respective states, or towards states more generally, is important, because we shouldn't, states feel the heat when it comes dynamically from society, and sort of try to address this. We had this GOP in Glasgow, a couple of weeks ago.
yeah,
I can't say that everything was solved, but the talk is out there. The discussion is there. States are now looking to see what they're going to do with their, emissions, what they're going to do with sustaining the environment. It's out there. So this is important, I think, in my opinion.
and if you think about the future generations, I mean, our children, whether they're our biological children or they're our children generally, I mean, what do we want to leave for them behind? It's really, really a crucial question to ask.
Absolutely.
So, and
Absolutely.
it's incredible to know that people like you are working in that direction. If you could give any piece of advice, I know this is cliche, but any piece of advice either to the youth or to the adults like us who are working with youth, what would you tell us?
I Something I said from the beginning: just engage, talk about these issues. It's very important that young people talk about these issues. Hopefully, parents at home, like us, talk about it with our children. But it's very important at the age, especially of youth. Educators are very important, because youth looks up and discusses with their educators, sometimes even more than they discuss with their parents. So I think this raising awareness and engaging and talking about these issues, even the hard issues, and even admitting mistakes, is something that is important, so we can just think that, these rights are all of our rights. Everyone on this planet has the same rights, and we all have to fight for everyone. And that would be my message. It's a simple message, but I think simpler messages probably go across better.
A very powerful message. Everyone has these rights and we all have to fight for them.
Yes.
Faith as artists, thank you so much for joining us today with this very, very important message. We look forward to more conversations with you in
Thank
the
you. Thank you very much. And thanks to Idea Gen Global. Thank you very much, Ms. Pelonis. Thank you.